Hello everyone, before we dive into today's story. If you love mysteries and untold secrets, don't forget to subscribe, hit like and share so we can explore these strange tales together. Now let's step into the story. You were told the Crusades were holy wars, that popes sent armies to reclaim Jerusalem, that kings marched for glory, that knights bled for Christ. But what if this was only the surface? A story carefully crafted to mask the deeper truth behind the pomp of banners and the sermons of the pulpits. Behind the gilded thrones and the proud kings, there existed another hand, unseen yet inexorably shaping the fate of empires. A hand that wore no crown but commanded kings, pledged poverty while hoarding the richest treasuries Europe had ever known, knelt in devout prayer while quietly constructing a state of its own. This was not chaos. The Crusades were deliberate, and the Templars, far from mere participants, were the architects, the quiet masters of a grand, terrifying design. Let your breath slow. Let the flickering candlelight guide your mind. The story is patient, waiting beneath layers of dust, silence, and oath. You are not here to rush. You are here to witness, to feel the shadow behind the narrative, to understand the terror hidden in the order, in the silence, in the quiet authority that bent kings and popes alike. And as we descend into this story, you will see that the Templars were not merely knights. They were a force of unseen power, of subtle fear, of disciplined obedience that could terrify even the strongest monarchs. Consider Jerusalem in 1099, not as a city of sanctity and pilgrim chants, but as a place soaked in iron and rot, filled with the heavy smell of death, the crackle of fires, the metallic taste of fear. When the Crusaders finally breached the city walls, banners high, swords gleaming, they believed themselves instruments of divine will. Yet the reality was carnage. Chroniclers whisper of blood reaching knees, of temple stones painted red, of churches steeped in violence rather than salvation. Pilgrims did not find peace, they found plunder, betrayal, and the raw edge of human terror. Here in this fragile city, teetering between faith and fear, a shadow began to move, unseen by all but a few. At first, it was merely a rumor. 9 knights, all French, who refused land, refused reward, who stayed in Jerusalem not to claim power but to protect pilgrims along the dangerous roads leading to the city. Their leader, Hugdepai, was soft-spoken, devout, unyielding. He asked only for shelter, quarters in a wing of the former Al-Aqsa Mosque, believed by Christians to stand upon the ruins of Solomon's temple. This choice was deliberate, symbolic, and terrifying in its quiet cunning. It was the first step of a design that would reshape the world, yet remain invisible to the chroniclers and kings who believed themselves in control. These knights called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. A cumbersome name, almost deliberately obscure, a mask for an order that had no horses, no banners, no recognition. But within 2 decades, these 9 would become the most powerful military religious order in Europe. Their rise would not be fueled by brute strength or the slaughter of armies, but by something subtler, the control of perception, of information, of timing. They were scholars of influence as much as warriors, architects of fear as much as of fortresses. Jerusalem's rulers, beleaguered by constant threats, banditry, and logistical chaos, found these men appealing. Here was clarity where there had been none, a group bound by vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, yet unwavering in their defense of pilgrims. A moral order in a city of moral confusion. But this clarity, as history shows, was manufactured, perfectly timed, and deeply strategic. Baldwin II, King of Jerusalem, seemed almost too eager to grant them access to the most sacred site, placing them at the heart of symbolic power. Why this site? Why not a barracks or monastery? The answer may have lain in secrets buried beneath centuries of dust and stone, secrets that only the Templars could see and only they could claim. For nearly a decade, these 9 knights operated in silence, unobserved, undocumented, yet thriving. Their records are nearly non-existent. The silence is deafening. Some argue it was poor medieval documentation. Others whisper of intention, deliberate erasure to conceal knowledge too dangerous, too profound, or too transformative. They were not merely guarding pilgrims, they were mapping, recording, discovering, claiming. And what they found beneath the Temple Mount may have changed the very course of history, shaping their rise, their discipline, and their terrifying aura. While other Crusader factions sought gold or relics, the Templars gathered knowledge scrolls, diagrams, fragments of architecture, possibly even texts predating the Crusades themselves. They understood the power of secrets. Information, more than iron or blood, could sway kings, fund armies, and build empires. And slowly, imperceptibly, their influence spread beyond Jerusalem. Royal courts began to recognize them, church councils invited them, privileges were granted without precedent. They were no longer 9 obscure men, they were nodes in a silent network, a shadowed architecture of power that could terrify and inspire simultaneously. And then came Bernard of Clairvaux. He was no soldier, yet his words moved monarchs more decisively than armies. His endorsement was not charity, it was strategy. He framed the Templars as the wholly perfect blend of monk and warrior, sanctifying violence, redirecting ambition, embedding them into European politics, and weaving a story so powerful that few dared question it. Yet even Bernard, meticulous chronicler of morality, never revealed what occurred in the tunnels beneath the Temple Mount, never explained the sudden ascendancy, the quiet accumulation of power. He praised the Templars' purity, their austerity, their obedience, while shadows gathered in the corridors below. Whispers of knowledge and relics unrecorded, untold. Waiting, by the 1120, the Templars had expanded across Europe. Commanderies, estates, loans, and donations flowed into their hands. They were no longer humble guardians, they were architects of a global network, their reach invisible but absolute. Their poverty was performative, a moral cloak that concealed unprecedented power. Kings, nobles, popes, they all bowed, often unaware of the subtle terror and absolute discipline that underpinned this order. And as rumors spread of forbidden relics, ancient knowledge, and secret wisdom, fear followed. Not fear of swords, but fear of control, of invisibility, of a network so disciplined that disobedience was unthinkable and secrecy a weapon as potent as any sword. Beneath the Temple Mount, silence was absolute. Not the kind of silence that comforted pilgrims, but the heavy, oppressive quiet of stone that had not felt sunlight in centuries. Dust and shadows clung to the walls as the 9 knights descended through narrow, winding staircases, their torches flickering, casting elongated shapes that seemed alive. Every echo of footsteps bounced back like whispers, as if the stone itself was listening. Here, in hidden chambers and tunnels, the Templars discovered what would define their power: fragments of texts older than any Christian king. Inscriptions etched in languages long forgotten. Symbols that resonated with an authority beyond comprehension. Some said they uncovered a cavern with an altar, not Christian, not Islamic, but ancient, radiating a sense of solemn dread that even the bravest knight could feel in his bones. It was as if the place remembered violence, devotion, and secrets long buried under empires that had turned to dust. Hug to Pay, the leader, understood immediately the stakes. These were not merely relics, they were instruments, knowledge that could be weaponized, disciplined, and deployed. The Knights established rules: secrecy above all, obedience absolute, and documentation meticulously hidden. They built a hierarchy that mirrored monastic life, yet was subtly militarized, a duality that would terrify outsiders once discovered. The order was no longer 9 men, it was a network, a seed planted to grow unseen, its tendrils winding through Europe and the Holy Land. They recorded everything, yet nothing in the open chronicles reflected their findings. Their scriptoriums were filled with diagrams of cryptic architecture, celestial charts, and maps that did not correspond to any known city. Scholars would later debate whether these were mystical, cartographic, or strategic. The Templars never explained. Each knight swore to silence under pain that was not merely spiritual but deeply psychological, a method of control that ensured loyalty by fear as much as faith. But the tunnels held more than knowledge. Strange phenomena occurred. Torches flickered without wind. Distant whispers echoed in languages the knights could not identify. Shadows appeared at the edges of vision, moving with intent. Some knights reported dreams of unseen kings, of fires that burned without heat, of voices calling them to acts not yet understood. Hugdepai insisted on discipline, attributing it to divine testing, but even he could not ignore the growing sense that the place itself was alive, aware, and watching. The structure of the Templar Order began to formalize in response to these experiences. Commanderies were established, each autonomous but linked by strict communication codes. Every member swore to the rule, a combination of monastic discipline and militaristic hierarchy. Obedience was not merely obedience to a superior, but obedience to the order itself, an abstract, almost spiritual entity that commanded respect and fear simultaneously. Hierarchies were reinforced through ritual, prayer, and the ever-present knowledge of what lay beneath the Temple Mount. Every knight carried the weight of secrets that could destroy or empower kings. Bernard of Clairvaux, the influential abbot, visited the order in these early years, though he never set foot in the deepest tunnels. His role was as crucial as any knight's blade. He framed the Templars as holy warriors, ascetic yet mighty, sanctified by faith. Yet Bernard also sensed the subtle power they wielded. In his letters, he praised their purity, devotion, and courage, but the careful phrasing suggests he understood there was more: an invisible authority quietly shaping politics, finance, and warfare. The fear he instilled was dual reverence for their holiness and a subtle unease at their unknown depth. The order's rise was sudden. Donations poured in from nobility across Europe. Kings granted lands, castles, and privileges. The Templars established a banking system holding treasures, transferring wealth, and issuing letters of credit far beyond contemporary imagination. Their influence grew, yet remained largely invisible. And all the while, the tunnels beneath Jerusalem continued to whisper secrets, to shape their rituals, and to define the structure of obedience that would make them untouchable for centuries. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect was the psychological conditioning of the Knights. Every new initiate was brought into the tunnels, guided through the same passages, made to witness the relics, the symbols, the whispers. Silence was enforced. Fear was encouraged, not cruelly but deliberately, an understanding that power and terror could coexist, that knowledge itself could dominate minds without a single sword raised. By the time a knight emerged from these chambers, he was irrevocably changed, bound not merely to men or kings or God, but to the order itself. The Templars became, therefore, not just soldiers or monks, but something more terrifying, custodians of knowledge older than Christendom. Wielders of an authority invisible yet absolute, disciplined in ways the outside world could barely comprehend. The Crusades themselves were their proving ground, a theater in which they demonstrated obedience, military precision, and the ability to shape outcomes without ostentation. Kings believed they commanded armies, the popes believed they sanctioned holy war. Yet the Templars operated according to a logic older than both. A hidden design that would ripple through centuries, touching kings, empires, and eventually history itself. And so the order grew, its influence multiplying like shadows in an underground hall. Every commandery, every knight, every relic, every secret woven into a network that was more than military, more than religious, more than political. It was an architecture of fear, faith, and absolute knowledge. And for those who knew only what was written in chronicles, who understood only the battles, the blood, the banners, Jerusalem, Acre, Tyre, these nights remained a mystery. A silent, disciplined, terrifying mystery whose echoes would haunt Europe and the Holy Land for centuries. When the Templars emerged from the shadows of Jerusalem, they carried more than swords and faith. They carried knowledge, influence, and secrets so potent that even kings trembled unknowingly beneath them. Europe, in the early 12th century, was a fractured continent of rival nobles, embattled monarchs, and indebted princes. Into this chaos, the Templars stepped not as mere soldiers of Christ, but as architects of control, wielding an invisible empire cloaked in virtue. Their first footholds were modest commanderies in France, England, and the Iberian Peninsula. Yet within each stone-walled house, the seeds of something far more audacious were planted. The Knights created systems for wealth accumulation, management, and transfer that outstripped the abilities of most monarchs. Kings would grant them lands and privileges, believing they were supporting holy warriors, while in reality they were financing an emerging network that could operate independently of crown, church, or law. The Templar banking system was revolutionary. They accepted deposits from pilgrims and nobles, issued letters of credit that allowed movement of vast sums across Europe and the Holy Land, and even provided loans to monarchs themselves. Imagine the disquiet of a king realizing that the very order he praised could withhold, transfer, or leverage wealth without his knowledge or consent. It was invisible power, silent but absolute, wielded through meticulous bookkeeping, coded correspondence, and absolute secrecy. Yet money was only a tool. The Templars understood human fear and ambition, and they manipulated both with subtlety. Legends persist of knights negotiating with entire courts under the guise of holy mediation, quietly ensuring debts, favors, and allegiances flowed in the direction of their silent order. Nobles who believed themselves patrons were, in many cases, unwitting clients of a system that served a higher, unseen authority. And all the while, the knights remained outwardly austere, humble, unassuming, an elegant deception that amplified their influence. Beyond finance, the Templars exerted control through information. Every relic, every document, every artifact they collected from Jerusalem was a keen instrument of power. These were not merely spiritual treasures, they were leverage, evidence, and sometimes instruments of intimidation. Rumors of secret knowledge, lost scriptures, or mystical objects under their care spread quietly among courts. Monarchs and popes alike understood on some level that the order commanded forces beyond conventional comprehension. To challenge them openly was not just politically risky, it was dangerous, and fear, subtle yet omnipresent, was cultivated deliberately. The Templars' silence, ritual, and disciplined austerity contributed to their almost supernatural reputation. Peasants whispered that the knights could see through deception. Courtiers speculated that they knew secrets no mortal should possess. Stories of knights appearing at distant castles overnight, moving with uncanny precision and unerring purpose, circulated with hushed awe. Some claimed to witness strange lights atop their commanderies, shadows moving with intent, as if the very walls themselves had become sentient. The Order's internal culture reinforced this psychological dominance. Training was rigorous, obedience absolute, secrecy enforced not through punishment alone, but through a deep sense of shared destiny and fear of the unknown. Initiates were introduced gradually to the full scope of the Templar world, including hints of the subterranean knowledge from Jerusalem. They were taught that power was inseparable from discretion, that true authority was wielded invisibly, and that to reveal what was forbidden was to invite ruin. By the time a knight left the initiation halls, he carried not just loyalty, but a quiet terror of the unknown that ensured compliance. Their military operations complemented this silent dominance. Unlike feudal levies, the Templars moved like a single organism. Castles held by Templars could withstand sieges far larger than their garrisons. They coordinated campaigns with uncanny efficiency, employing messengers, coded letters, and pre-planned logistics that seemed almost preternatural. Outsiders could not fathom the structure behind the discipline, and even allies often marveled at their effectiveness while understanding very little of the mechanisms that drove it. Consider their influence on the Crusades themselves. While public narratives celebrated noble zeal, pious sacrifice, and divine favor, the Templars were quietly engineering outcomes. They controlled supply routes, protected key locations, and manipulated alliances. Kings marched, armies fought, and banners waved, yet the Templars shaped the battlefield from shadows, guiding events toward strategic objectives that only they fully comprehended. It was not chaos, it was orchestration, silent, precise, and terrifying in its efficiency. And yet, for all this, the Order maintained its outward humility. Publicly, the Templars were the poor soldiers of Christ, dedicated, devout, disciplined. Privately, they were custodians of knowledge, masters of wealth, and arbiters of fear. The duality was deliberate. By projecting simplicity, they concealed the extraordinary. Wealth, power, and terror existed beneath the surface, accessible only to those who swore the oaths, who descended into the corridors of secrecy, who understood the unseen world of the Templar network. The psychological impact on Europe cannot be overstated. Monarchs who sought to challenge them found doors, subtly closed alliances shifted inexplicably, debts were quietly enforced. The Knights' reach extended into courts, monasteries, and markets alike. Rumors of their secret practices, rituals beneath cathedrals, tunnels under cities, relics of power spread quietly, creating a pervasive undercurrent of fear and reverence. It was a power that required no swords, no battles, no overt displays. It was absolute because it was invisible, disciplined, and total. Yet the Templars' greatest achievement may not have been in banking, politics, or even military dominance. It was in their ability to craft a narrative, a story of humility, piety, and devotion that masked a sophisticated web of influence. Every charter, every seal, every ceremonial oath reinforced the illusion while consolidating real-world authority. Kings, popes, and nobles believed they understood the order, but they only glimpsed the surface. The true power remained hidden, and therein lay the terror. As their influence spread across Europe, the order became both admired and feared. Rumors circulated of knights who vanished, of wealth that appeared inexplicably, of alliances brokered in silence. Some whispered of arcane knowledge, perhaps remnants of the Temple Mount discoveries guiding decisions far beyond mortal comprehension. Others speculated that the Templars had learned to manipulate perception itself, to wield fear, faith, and loyalty as weapons more powerful than swords. And in a world where kings killed, nobles schemed, and armies bled, such invisible weapons were infinitely more dangerous. By the mid-12th century, the Templars were no longer just a military religious order. They were an empire without borders. A network of control invisible yet absolute. Their commanderies functioned as nodes in a continent-wide system, their knights as agents of influence, and their knowledge as the key to power. Europe had not seen anything like it, and yet to the public it appeared simple, holy, and devout paradox that the Templars mastered with chilling precision. And still, beneath the veneer of devotion, whispers persisted. What had they found under Jerusalem? What secret knowledge empowered this small band of knights to bend kings, manipulate markets, and control armies? The chronicles are silent. Legends hint at relics, scrolls, or forgotten rites. Modern historians puzzle over gaps in records, unexplained wealth, and the uncanny effectiveness of the order. Some dismiss it as coincidence, others fear the explanation may be more unsettling. For those who study the Templars, the conclusion is inescapable. True power does not need to be seen to be absolute. And those who wield it in silence hold dominion over the visible world in ways that are both subtle and terrifying. By the early 14th century, the unassailable empire of the Templars began to show cracks not from external enemies, but from the very world they had manipulated so masterfully. Kings who had once been indebted to their coffers grew restless. Monarchs who had benefited from their banking and strategic prowess began to covet the immense wealth and hidden knowledge for themselves. And, as always, human ambition breeds paranoia. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, had long admired the Templars' discipline and influence. Yet admiration twisted into fear. To a monarch drowning in debt, the order's resources appeared both irresistible and threatening. Philip's advisors whispered of the Templars' secret knowledge, their alleged arcane rites, and the invisible network through which they controlled kings, nobles, and clergy alike. Whether these rumors were true or exaggerated mattered little in the shadows of power. Perception often carries as much weight as reality. On a cold Friday in October 1307, the trap was set. Knights across France were arrested simultaneously, accused of heresy, blasphemy, and corruption. The spectacle was both calculated and symbolic. The king wielded law as a weapon, exposing the invisible empire to public scrutiny while masking his true intent, seizing wealth, eliminating rivals, and consolidating power. Those arrested faced brutal interrogation. Some confessed under torture, their words twisted to fit the narrative of heresy. Others maintained silence, steadfast in their oaths, disappearing into darkness with secrets intact. The arrests were only the beginning. Trials, rumors, and executions followed, designed to terrify and discredit. Crowds gathered, watching the burning of knights, hearing whispered tales of rituals gone awry, of forbidden knowledge unearthed. In the public eye, the Templars were destroyed, their symbols tarnished, their power extinguished. Yet behind the spectacle, a different story persisted, a story of secrecy, endurance, and survival. For not all Templars were captured. Some vanished into obscurity, carrying fragments of knowledge and treasure that would become legends whispered in hidden chambers and private libraries. Others infiltrated courts, monasteries, and guilds, blending in while quietly preserving the secrets of the order. The fall of the Templars was public, their legacy invisible, and this legacy was more than wealth, it was knowledge. Relics, documents, and manuscripts, many from Jerusalem, disappeared into hidden vaults or were concealed beneath monasteries, castles, and cathedrals. Some whispered that certain texts contained instructions to unlock unimaginable power or insight into the human mind and soul. Others spoke of mystical artifacts, sacred geometry, and coded maps pointing to locations of unimaginable significance. All were deliberately obscured, entrusted to those sworn to secrecy or hidden within symbols disguised as religious art. Even the psychological shadow of the Templars endured. Rumors persisted across Europe, a cloaked figure appearing in the night, a knightly emblem etched subtly into church architecture, or a coded inscription in a manuscript that only initiates could decipher. Some scholars and chroniclers recorded unexplainable events, vaults appearing empty, wealth materializing suddenly, and messages delivered through mysterious channels. These phenomena suggested that while the order's public existence ended, its mechanisms continued to operate in silence, invisibly and deliberately. The Church, complicit in the trials yet ambivalent in belief, preserved some of the Templar knowledge selectively. Certain manuscripts were transferred to monasteries, other relics quietly absorbed into papal holdings. Popes at the time claimed moral justification. Yet in private, some acknowledged the depth and sophistication of the order, fearing that its wisdom and influence could not be easily contained. The very secrecy the Templars had mastered became a weapon even after their dissolution. And so, a paradox emerged. The Templars fell publicly, but their essence endured, hidden and potent. Their knowledge influenced banking, architecture, military strategy, and religious symbolism for centuries. Secret societies, whether Masonic or otherwise, drew inspiration from their rituals and hierarchy. Artifacts once in Templar hands found their way into castles, palaces, and private collections, often misattributed, misunderstood, yet still carrying subtle power. The invisible empire had transformed into a ghostly legacy, intangible, almost mythic, yet palpable to those who sought it. Modern scholars and treasure hunters continue to chase fragments of this shadowed past. From cryptic manuscripts in European libraries to underground vaults beneath ancient cathedrals, conspiracies thrive, blending fact, fiction, and imagination, tales of lost Holy Grail pieces, maps to secret vaults, and codes that could unlock ancient wisdom. Some dismiss these as legend, others quietly wonder whether the Templars, masters of secrecy and influence, left clues meant only for those worthy enough to find them. In the end, the story of the Templars is not one of simple rise and fall. It is a story of mastery, discipline, and silent dominion. It is a tale of power invisible to the untrained eye, of influence woven into the very fabric of European society. The world saw knights, swords, and religious devotion. But beneath, hidden from history's surface, was an order capable of bending kings, managing empires, and manipulating perception itself. Even today, shadows of the Templars linger. In architecture and ritual, in coded symbols, in whispered stories, the faint echo of something far older than the red cross stitched onto white mantles persists. Perhaps the Templars were never truly gone. Perhaps they are not merely history, but a subtle, enduring presence, reminding us that true power is often invisible, quiet, and terrifyingly complete. And as night falls over forgotten commanderies and ancient vaults, one might hear, if listening closely, the faint echo of a chant, the soft scrape of armor, or the distant whisper of secrets that have survived centuries. For the Templars, in life or legend, never fully disappear. They remain in the spaces between fear and faith, in the shadows of history, and in the minds of those who dare to seek what is hidden, where power sleeps beneath silence. And it didn't stop there. Other bulls followed. Knights Templar in 1144 confirmed their ability to collect tithes. Militia Day in 1145 reinforced their freedom to travel and preach across Christendom. Bit by bit, the Templars were carved out of the medieval order and placed in a category all their own. Not just warriors of Christ, but agents of the papacy, unbound by the normal chains of feudalism. Naturally, this caused friction. Local bishops began to grumble. Kings grew wary. Peasants who saw their own churches taxed and their own priests monitored couldn't understand why these armed monks got to ride through town unchallenged, untouched. But the order had something even stronger than immunity. They had narrative. They were the poor knights, remember, the selfless protectors of pilgrims, the disciplined sons of the temple. Anyone who questioned them was questioning holiness itself. Or so the story went. And as long as that illusion held, the exemptions did too. One obscure clerical letter from the mid-12th century describes a dispute in Aragon where a local bishop tried to fine a Templar house for illegal land expansion. The order refused to pay. The bishop appealed. Rome responded with silence. The bishop eventually resigned. The Templars kept the land. Case closed. This legal architecture built of bulls' favors and theological sleight of hand allowed the order to grow not just militarily but economically. Their estates became tax shelters. Their banking houses operated free from local tariffs. Donations flowed in protected by divine mandate. And with each new commander established, the bubble grew wider. Other religious orders received privileges too, but none as sweeping, as fast, or as thoroughly enforced as those given to the Templars. Modern researchers have wondered why. Why this group? Why these knights, and why such total protection? One theory suggests a quiet exchange services rendered for silence maintained. Perhaps their time beneath the Temple Mount unearthed something of interest to the Vaticana relic, a text, a set of claims better left unspoken. In that view, papal immunity wasn't generosity, it was insurance. Another possibility is simpler leverage. By the 1130, the Templars had begun organizing logistical routes, shipping lines, and supply networks vital to Crusader efforts. Losing them would mean losing the arteries of holy war. Better to protect them fully than risk them turning to another patron. And then there's the third theory, the most unsettling, that the order's autonomy was not a gift from the papacy but a demand. The Templars negotiated from strength, not supplication, presenting their deeds, their reach, their findings, and in return, the Pope signed. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. The Templars became untouchable, not by sword but by scroll. Their immunity wasn't just legal, it was sacred, a seal on parchment more powerful than any fortress wall. And in the centuries to come, as kings grew jealous and inquisitors sharpened their quills, these privileges would be remembered not fondly, but bitterly. Because while everyone else played the feudal game, the Templars had rewritten the rules. They were sworn to poverty, yet lent to emperors. They claimed no possessions, yet built treasuries rivaling royal coffers. While the official narrative focused on swords and sanctity, the real engine of Templar power was something far less romantic: finance. Beneath their white mantles, the knights quietly became medieval Europe's most trusted bankers and its most dangerous creditors. It started, as most systems do, with necessity. Roads to Jerusalem were long and perilous. Pilgrims, nobles, and crusaders traveling from Europe could not haul sacks of coin across war-torn territory without risk of robbery or loss. The Templars offered an elegant solution: deposit money at a Templar house in London or Paris, receive a coded document, and withdraw equivalent funds from a Templar commandery in Acre or Jerusalem. Secure, discreet, revolutionary. The order had effectively invented the earliest version of international banking. They used ciphers to encode documents, trained clerks in double-entry bookkeeping centuries before it became common, and maintained account ledgers with remarkable precision. Money went out, and more came back. As their financial reputation grew, monarchs began to notice. By the mid-12th century, the Templars weren't just guardians of pilgrim coin purses, they handled royal treasuries, yet they remained officially poor. This paradox, poverty in rhetoric, wealth in reality, was no accident. By maintaining the image of aesthetic devotion, the Templars deflected criticism. Finance was not merely a service, it was sacred order. Discipline applied not just to swords and prayers, but to accounting ledgers. Papal immunity shielded them, and kings, so long as the coin flowed, had no incentive to intervene. Their network of commanderies became vaults, libraries, and counting houses, all under divine protection. Even in Jerusalem, the spiritual heart of their mission, the temple operated as more than a fortress. Gold moved in and out, not by sword but by scroll. Pilgrims thought donations fed the poor or maintained holy sites. Many did, but others fed the arteries of a transcontinental financial system few understood and dared question. It wasn't just physical coin. The Templars trafficked in promises, future tithes, pledged estates, promised levies. They monetized obligations before they were paid, issuing credit in advance and collecting interest in silence. By the mid-12th century, the Templars had developed a chain of fortresses stretching across the Crusader states like vertebrae in a spine. Fortresses like Gaza, Tortosa, and others weren't mere defensive structures. They were nodes in a global network. Their design wasn't accidental spiraling interiors, layered curtain walls, keep placement anticipating betrayal as much as battle. Entrances could be collapsed, supply rooms sealed. It was as if the castles were designed not only to withstand external threat but internal failure. And yet they weren't just military. Their placement asserted cultural dominance. Many fortresses sat atop former Islamic strongholds or within striking distance of Jewish merchant towns. Commanders kept tight control, local peasants were excluded, mercenaries separated from inner quarters. Even other knights sometimes denied access unless bearing the correct seals. These were closed circuits, military, financial, spiritual, always quiet, always watching. Their strategic importance was undeniable. During the Battle of Montesard in 1177, it was Templar fortresses that allowed the sudden rally of Crusader forces against Saladin. When Saladin later recaptured Jerusalem, Templar strongholds continued to resist for months. The architectural coherence across regions suggests centralized planning. Someone somewhere issued designs, managed logistics, approved blueprints. The Templars were not feudal, they were global, and it didn't end there. By the early 14th century, cracks appeared, but not in their power, only in perception. Kings grew envious, peasants murmured, inquisitors sharpened quills. On a cold Friday in October 1307, arrests swept across France. Knights vanished, interrogations commenced, and public spectacle tried to erase them. Yet whispers persisted, some survived, carrying fragments of knowledge, treasure, and secrets meant to outlast centuries. Even as the Templars fell publicly, their invisible empire endured. Their knowledge, their networks, and their rituals influenced banking, military strategy, and secret societies for generations. Their fortresses, their ledgers, their silent operations became myths, whispers, and coded histories. The world saw knights and crosses beneath. A system of power operated quietly, shaping kings, armies, and empires without drawing a sword. The poor knights of the temple may have fallen, but their influence financial, architectural, and spiritual lingered. In cloisters, in vaults, in manuscripts misfiled and forgotten, the faint echo of the Templars persists. A shadow empire, invisible yet potent, reminding all who seek that true power is rarely wielded openly and often survives in silence, secrecy, and shadow. Yet, for all the fragility of such delicate arrangements, the Templars proved astonishingly adept at survival. Their system of layered command and coded communication allowed them to navigate the shifting tides of politics with near prescience. A fortress under threat could call for reinforcements before the enemy even realized what was happening. Couriers carried messages not only about troop movements but about local allegiances, potential betrayals, and opportunities to secure vital supply lines. This transactional neutrality was not mere pragmatism, it was calculated influence. By quietly engaging with Muslim governors, local lords, and rival Christian factions alike, the Templars created a web of interdependency. They maintained the flow of goods, information, and coin, while projecting the outward image of unyielding holiness. To the common observer, they were monks in white riding to protect pilgrims. To kings, they were indispensable administrators and financiers. To enemies, they were a variable neither fully loyal nor entirely hostile, a wild card whose favor could be bought only in secrecy. Consider the fortress of Safad, perched high above the Hula Valley. During a period when the Crusader kingdom teetered on collapse, Templar garrisons coordinated the safe passage of caravans carrying grain and silver through territories controlled by both Christian and Muslim lords. Letters from Acre indicate that local emirs were paid not in gold, but in promises of favorable trade and leniency in future campaigns. The Templars held the leverage, yet it was invisible. No banners, no claims, only the quiet hum of commerce under their oversight. And while their diplomacy remained shadowy, their military discipline never faltered. Commanders drilled knights with precision, ensuring that every movement across a battlefield could be anticipated and coordinated. Siegecraft, ambush tactics, and reconnaissance were meticulously cataloged in internal manuals. Maps marked not only hills and rivers but the safest crossings, hidden paths, and vantage points unseen by contemporary chroniclers. Every fortress, every route, every post existed as part of a system, a network whose threads ran from Europe to the Levant, from the Mediterranean coasts to inland trade hubs. Even in moments of catastrophic loss, the network endured. When Jerusalem fell in 1187, Templar outposts across Galilee and the northern coastal cities resisted months longer than conventional armies, maintaining a skeleton of authority and control. They preserved wealth, documents, and relics that would later vanish into the folds of history, leaving only whispers and coded accounts for future generations to puzzle over. The pattern was consistent wherever political upheaval threatened. The Templars adapted, negotiated, and survived. In some cases, this meant making morally ambiguous choices, alliances with enemies of the faith, temporary truces that might shock the devout, but each was justified under the strict code of the order, the preservation of the mission, the pilgrims, and the temple itself. Their independence allowed them to operate in these gray zones in ways no monarch or church official could. By the turn of the 13th, century, the Templar strategy had evolved into something near genius. Fortresses doubled as financial centers. Commanderies became depots, communication hubs, and intelligence offices. Every movement of coin, supply, or army could be tracked and influenced. Their network was not merely a defensive measure, it was a form of governance, invisible yet omnipresent, a structure that allowed a relatively small order to exert influence over kings and empires alike. Yet this very omnipotence sowed the seeds of envy and fear. The accumulation of wealth, the reach of their influence, and the secrecy of their operations began to attract scrutiny. Kings, once reliant on Templar loans and logistics, started to see the order as a rival rather than a partner. Local lords whispered accusations. Ecclesiastical authorities questioned their intentions, and rumor gave birth to suspicion. And when political tides shifted, the Templars' shadowed dealings, their hidden vaults, and their secret agreements made them vulnerable. Their autonomy, once a shield, became a target. What the popes had granted in bulls and decrees, the right to move unhindered, to manage property, to hold wealth, could now be construed as arrogance or treachery. And so, by the early 14th century, when charges of heresy, corruption, and occult practices were levied against them, the carefully constructed edifice of power began to crumble. Not due to military defeat, but through the very networks they had relied upon: secrecy, trust, and influence. Yet even in the face of arrest, trial, and execution, the Templars' legacy endured. Vaults emptied, but knowledge persisted. Networks were absorbed by other orders, and secret codes and passages continued to exist in plain sight. Their castles, relics, and ledgers, sometimes forgotten, sometimes destroyed, left traces that scholars, explorers, and historians still uncover today. Every tunnel found beneath a fortress, every document recovered from decay, hints at a world within the medieval world. A labyrinth of power, secrecy, and survival meticulously maintained for generations. The story of the Templars, therefore, is not merely one of knights, battles, or crusades. It is the story of an invisible infrastructure, a network of power and influence that moved in shadows and silence. They were warriors and bankers, diplomats and engineers, pious monks and pragmatic strategists. They were, in every sense, a civilization within a civilization, operating beside kingdoms, above law, and beneath the gaze of a church that both empowered and feared them. And when we look at the patterns, the alignments of castles, the overlap with hospitals, the coded correspondence, and the flow of wealth and information, a stark realization emerges: the Templars were never merely knights. They were architects of an unseen empire, a blueprint for influence that transcended geography, politics, and even time. Their white mantles bore crosses, but beneath those symbols lay something far more enduring: a network of control, survival, and silent dominion, the echo of which resonates even now in the hidden corners of European history. By 1307, the Templars had reached the zenith of their power, a network spanning continents, fortresses commanding trade routes, vaults overflowing with coin, and an intelligence system capable of outmaneuvering kings. Yet, in a single autumn, that invisible empire would shatter, not by sword, but by decree. King Philip IV of France, deeply indebted to the order, saw both a solution to his financial woes and an opportunity to eliminate a rival he could not fully control. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, Templars across France were arrested simultaneously. Commanders, knights, and even scribes were accused of heresy, blasphemy, and corruption. The accusations were staggering in their detail: secret rituals, idolatry, even unnatural acts, but the evidence was often contradictory, sometimes ludicrous, and always secret. What had made the Templars untouchable, their papal bulls, their secrecy, their network, suddenly became a liability. Letters, ledgers, and coded documents were seized, but not all were deciphered. Some vaults vanished without trace. Hidden chambers beneath castles, tunnels long sealed, and cryptic scrolls disappeared. The order that had thrived in shadows now faced exposure in daylight. Yet even in collapse, the Templars demonstrated the very cunning that had kept them alive for 2 centuries. Commanderies outside France, Portugal, Aragon, England, and the Holy Land remained untouched for months, preserving treasures and knowledge. Some assets were quietly transferred to the Hospitallers. Other relics and wealth vanished into secret caches, their locations known only to a handful of surviving initiates. The network had contingency built into it. The empire could fracture, but it could not fully die. Pope Clement V, under pressure from Philip, reluctantly disbanded the order in 1312. Officially, the Templars ceased to exist. Unofficially, their influence lingered. Banking practices, trade networks, and logistical innovations survived under other institutions. The lessons learned, the coded correspondence, the methods of secrecy and leverage all had left an indelible mark on Europe's emerging financial and political landscape. Perhaps the greatest mystery is what was lost forever. Sacred relics that had legitimized their authority, documents detailing clandestine deals with Muslim leaders, engineering plans for fortresses, and the locations of hidden vaults all became part of the Templars' enduring legend. Centuries later, historians and treasure hunters alike still chase shadows of these secrets, finding only fragments, hints, and patterns that refuse to fully reveal the truth. And so, when we look back at the Templars, it becomes clear that their story was never only about war or piety. It was about control of wealth, information, and movement, executed with unparalleled precision and secrecy. Their castles were not simply fortifications, they were nodes in a continent-spanning network. Their vaults were not merely treasuries, they were instruments of power. Their knights were not only warriors, they were bankers, diplomats, and intelligence officers. History remembers the Templars as martyrs, villains, or heroes, depending on the perspective. Yet beneath the legend, we see a pattern, a disciplined, hierarchical, and covert organization that redefined power itself in an age of swords and scrolls. They moved beside kings, whispered in the ears of popes, and negotiated silently with foes. They were the unseen hand guiding the flow of crusades, commerce, and politics, their influence lingering long after their banners were struck down. In the end, the story of the Templars is a study in paradox: poverty yet wealth, obedience yet independence, faith yet calculation, silence yet communication. Their rise and fall teach us that true power often operates unseen, that networks, information, and leverage can achieve more than armies. and that history is rarely written by those who wield the sword. It is written by those who understand the terrain between ambition and secrecy. The Knights Templar were, in every sense, the architects of an invisible empire. Their mantles bore the red cross of Christ, but beneath that symbol lay a far more enduring creation, a network, a strategy, a blueprint for influence that could survive kings, popes, and centuries. And even today, when ruins of commanderies crumble and dusty ledgers are studied by historians, the faint echo of their power whispers through time, reminding us that the true legacy of the Templars was never the battles they fought, but the world they quietly controlled.